Welcome back, guys, to another Top 10 video. Top 10 Rocket League players of 2016. Number 5, we have Remkoe from the Weedham Girls / Northern Gaming Squad. He's also on Spectral for a bit there as well. But Remkoe, honestly, I think of him as more of like the backbone of the Northern Gaming Squad. He's more of like the guy that controls the flow of the game. He has a lot of midfield presence. And honestly, I thought at the start of the year, he was in the running for one of the best players in the world with his mechanics. Probably around at the height of Northern Gaming, right around May, June-ish. And I still think he's a very solid player, of course. But I think his role changed a bit on the team, that it doesn't show maybe all of his mechanics all the time. So maybe not in the running for best player in the world right now. But still an extremely solid player. Had a lot of success in 2016. And let's go over it right now. First, we got the accomplishments. January through March, he was on Team Spectral for the Gfinity Invitational, which we talked about a bunch here already. They actually came in 4th place, which was actually a surprisingly good result for them. Spectral was not the greatest team in the world. No one really expected Spectral to do much. But they did show up here, 12-11 record, though they did beat Team Rocket as one of those wins. But they also beat Noble. I would say probably two of the weaker teams throughout. They did get a little bit of an easy bracket. They faced Team Rocket, and then they faced the Noble squad that had the shocking result over Flipside, where no one really thought Noble was actually that good. So it got them moving for. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I think they faced Noble in the lower rounds, but either way. That they lost to Flipside in the lower semis. And, you know, everyone's really losing to Flipside. But they took them to 7 games. It was the only team to really make Flipside work at all after they lost their very first series. No other team came close, but Spectral almost defeated Flipside in the lower semis, losing to them 4-3. And then we move on to the RLC Pro League, where they had an extremely disappointing finish, 11th place, 6th in the EU. They had an 11-19 regular season. I believe Remkoe didn't play in the final week. I think Scrub played for them, and Remkoe at that point was already leaving Spectral, and Spectral was disbanded very shortly after this. But they defeated SK and Noble, but that's it. They didn't defeat anyone else throughout the regular season. They had some close sets. Hence, the record was 11-19. It wasn't terrible, but could not make the playoffs. And this is when Remkoe was flirting around with the Weedham Girls players, getting ready to move on over there. And honestly, with his looks, he can get any team. Let's be fair here. But we'll move on to quarter number 2, where things really start ramping up for Remgod. And with the Weedham Girls squad, they absolutely dominated pretty much all Rocket Royales throughout the entire year. But Rocket Royale International, the tougher version, because only 2 teams make it out of Europe, 2 teams from North America, and they battle it out in the top 4. He participated in 9 of 9. They came in 1st 3 times, 2nd twice, 3rd twice. So 7 out of 9 they made podium. This was when everyone considered Weedham Girls the best team in the world, and the Rem God had a lot to do with it. He was going off in a lot of these big tournaments, having some crazy shots, some crazy angles, and just performing at the peak, I would say, of his career so far. And then the RLCS came by in qualifier number 1. They just couldn't get by Flipside when it really mattered in the RLCS, and that trend continued throughout the year. They came in 2nd place. They had a 26-9 regular season record. They had the EU first seed, but they finished 32-13, which was still pretty solid. But they defeated Kapow 4-0 in the semifinals. It really showed that first qualifier. Really showed that Flipside and Weedham Girls were way ahead of everyone else in Europe, both getting sweeps. And then they wound up losing to Flipside 4-2 in the finals. And once again, that'll be a trend that continues throughout. But really solid performance with the number 2 spot. But again, they just couldn't beat Flipside when the time it mattered. But Rocket Royale, they performed amazing. Like, once they formed, everyone knew that this team was going to be a force to be reckoned with, because they were flirting around playing as Weedham Girls when they weren't officially a team, and they were winning a lot. Like G-Finities, beaten the likes of Flipside or these other top European teams. And everyone knew that they were going to make a team. They were just waiting for the end of the RLC Pro League. And when that came, that's when they looked extremely scary. And at the time, that was Remkoe, Maestro, and Greasy Meister. And that's where, like, their backboard meta, like, they were the best at the backboard plays throughout the spring and summer. And a lot of teams started to try and copy that. But they couldn't really play at the same pace that Weedham Girls was playing at. They were playing at a phenomenally fast pace. The only team really close was probably Flipside. And everyone else was trying to figure out how they could play faster and faster. There's always the jokes about macros, but Weedham Girls were always known to be the fastest to the ball when it went in the air, and Rem God, the Remkoe, was one of the best players at that at the time. And honestly, it kept going throughout the year, but I think he fell back a little bit back to the competition as the year continued, as people started to get better and better. But then we move on to quarter number 3, which we'll talk about in a second. We're going to let this replay run out here before we get into that. But this is when they actually got picked up by Northern Gaming. They got picked up by Northern Gaming right before the first RLCS LAN. So it was really nice to see another big org coming in and joining the likes of Flipside in Europe. And we'll move on to the other replay. And here it is, I think. Or is this the one I just did? Can't remember. Nope, this is the right one. I did it right. All right, let's go. So we got more Remkoe. But again, Rocket Royale. Now this was going on between the LAN, so at the end of the regular season of RLCS 1 and before the LAN and just after the LAN, they participated, Northern Gaming, 6 of 7 Rocket Royales. They came in first 4 times out of those 6. They came in second one other time, and they missed the podium once. They had a phenomenal run through the regional Rocket Royale tournaments. And everyone thought going into the first RLCS LAN that Northern Gaming was actually the favorites over Flipside, just because of how well they've been playing in the Rocket Royales. Like, they were beating Flipside pretty handily throughout the Rocket Royales. Just when it was at the RLCS main stage, during either playoffs or during LANs, they just couldn't get the win. But before the first LAN, Northern Gaming was the number 1 seed going into the LAN for Europe, and the favorites to win it all. The Flipside was probably a close second, but Northern Gaming definitely that number 1 team going into the LAN. And then, I don't know if it's necessarily disappointing. The top 3 finish at a LAN is good, but going to the winter bracket finals, losing the Cosmic, and then like immediately losing to Flipside right after really hurt them in day 2. They haven't had any success at all, the entire Northern Gaming squad, or Remkoe, on day 2 so far. Remkoe is a perfect 4-0 on day 1s, and a perfect 0-4 on day 2s. So they got to find a way to bounce back after a loss at the LAN stage. It just seems like they can't do it just yet. We can't tell if that's just, because like the level of competition is always going to be really fierce when you go into that lower bracket finals, and they had to play Flipside both times. So we can't tell if it's only that or if there is some tilt factor coming in with these LANs. That's like the one negative for the Northern Gaming squad, has just been, can they win after they lose at a LAN setting? They just haven't been able to do it. But third place is still pretty strong. They defeated Genesis and Exodus on day 1. Honestly, a little bit of an easier road. Like, I think Exodus was a formidable opponent, though, and they destroyed them. But Genesis, obviously an easy opponent, but they did earn that right with the number 1 Europe seed. And they did win the qualifier number 2 as well, because Flipside lost to Supersonic Avengers in the semis. And then Northern went on to crush Supersonic Avengers' hopes and dreams of making the LAN and defeating them as well. So they went in as the Europe number 1 team, which, as the strongest region, was a huge deal then. But once again, Remkoe coming up pretty big. For the RLCS Season 1, number 4 in goals, number 4 in shots. Again, though, his stats usually are not there compared to maybe his teammates at times because of the way he plays. He's a lot more of a midfield player coming up for cleanup. Generally, his assists usually aren't that high. The only thing usually high are his goals. That's about it. Everything else is kind of behind. Not necessarily making the most saves, but he definitely limits shot attempts by the other teams, which is not really a stat we have, so you can't really say too much on it, but it's there. Anyway, we'll continue. RLCS season number 2. It was like deja vu for Remkoe. At this point, Greasy left to join Flipside. So they went through a little bit of a roster shuffle, trying to figure out who they were going to get. They actually got Pashy for 2 Rocket Royales. One of them they won, so that was one of their wins there, because that was after Greasy had already left. And then one, I believe they didn't even make podium. And that's when they told Pashy, hey, this isn't working out. We're going to try and find someone else. So Remkoe and Maestro picked up Mystic, who actually played for Spectral with Remkoe for a short while there as well. So Remkoe was very familiar with Mystic. And at first, I doubted the move. I didn't know if Mystic could handle coming up to like one of the best teams in Europe and playing at that level. And to be fair, during the regular season, maybe he didn't play that well, but at the Season 2 LAN, he performed exceptionally well. But Northern Gaming, they finished second in Europe. They couldn't find a way to beat Flipside, though. They lost 4-0 to Flipside in the finals. At that point, Flipside was a huge favorite for the LAN, and they still couldn't find it when they went to the LAN. They did beat Maki Aces 4-3 for the online qualifiers, but then wound up losing to them in the winter bracket finals 4-3, the first ever 7-game series at the LAN. Heartbreaking loss for Northern Gaming. And then went on to lose to Flipside 4-1 again. Day 2 woes, 0-2 once again. Day 1, they played Genesis once again. It was a rematch, and they absolutely destroyed Genesis 3-0. Genesis looked absolutely awful. And then they also beat Precision Z, who took out the #1 seed in NRG, and they beat them 3-1, which again, I would say was another fairly easy road for Northern Gaming. No one expected PZ to beat Northern Gaming just because of how much Northern Gaming has dominated them throughout the season, and it just didn't seem like it was going to be possible. So they did get another somewhat easy roll, but once again, they did earn it. They play their bracket how it is dealt to them, and they do really well up until Day 2, when it gets a little bit more of a tougher competition. Losing to Mocket 4-3, and then Flipside 4-1 when Flipside was going on an absolute tear. They did finally get a win against Flipside, their first win of the entire season. They wound up going 1-11, I believe it was, if I did my math correctly, versus Flipside. So not great. But again, Remkoe performed pretty well during Season 2. #3 in goals. No other stat really calls out, but once again, Northern Gaming's defense of not letting shots happen is mostly the job of Remkoe. He does sit back and let the likes of Maestro get a little bit more of the numbers with the stats, but he did perform decently well. Like, I wouldn't say he was a huge like outstanding player at either LAN. He played really well, but nothing really stood out to me from Remkoe's play. But honestly, his results speak for themselves. Had a phenomenal year, even with Greasy leaving the team. They came back with Mystic, didn't drop a beat, still came in #3 at the LAN. Of course, like Remkoe, Maestro, now that happened to them twice in a row. They don't want to see that happen again. So we'll see them trying to bounce back in 2017. And it's hard for me to even say bounce back, because finishing top 3 at both LANs is a huge accomplishment, and I expect to see more of that from the Northern Gaming squad in 2017. So look out for Remkoe and the boys, because they're coming for you. #5, Remkoe. Honestly, probably the prettiest man on this top 10. Maybe his teammate, Maestro, if we see him. Which I think I just spoiled #4 or #3 or #2. Maybe if he's on the list. We'll see if he's prettier. But I got to go with my boy Remkoe. Northern Gaming, the boy band. #5, Remkoe, top 10 of 2016. We'll see you guys next week for #4, 3, and 2. Maybe I'll throw in one there. I'm not sure. I might leave one for the Monday after. But make sure you come by and check it out again. And thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.